All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar, A Positive Finish, Ending the Year with Joy. Our focus this evening is really going to be reflecting on this year and also gaining some insight on how to close this year in a positive way. I'm your moderator this evening. My name is Jane Kofi, and I am a curriculum and instructional designer with the Center for Responsive Schools. But prior to that, I was a classroom teacher. I taught pre-K through fifth grade for 20 years, and I'm coming to you from my home in Virginia. We have an incredible panel of both educators and students, but before I introduce our panel, I want to introduce someone who's going to be working behind the scenes to support us and also to answer questions, and that's my friend and colleague, Dr. Joe Tilley.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Tilley. I do work in the same department as Jane. I'm a curriculum and instructional designer as well for CRS. I primarily work with the middle school material, and so that's kind of where my focus is. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher for many years, and I taught everything from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then moved into some district roles as a coach and as a district supervisor. And so with that, I will just let you know what I'm going to be doing. I'll be monitoring the chat box as well as the question and answer box. And so if you've got a chat, you want to send it to me, please do. If you've got a question that you want to send to me, you can do that as well. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the evening. With that, I'll send it back over to Jane.
Thanks, Joe. And so throughout this evening, you'll probably notice that you can see us, but you might not be able to see everyone else. And the way that this format is set up is that you'll be able to see all of our incredible panelists. You'll be able to see myself. And then if you have a question for our panelists, we're going to try to answer them at the end, but also Joe will be able to answer questions in real time as they're happening, so that if you find that you have a question during that time, he can right away answer that for you. And so you're probably wondering whether you can be seen or heard. In this particular format, you'll be able to see the panelists and hear the panelists, but you won't be able to see one another. So if there's a question that you have, use the Q&A. And if there's just something that is resonating with you, feel free to put that in the chat box. And without further ado, I want to introduce our incredible panelists, and I'm going to start with our educators.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Christine Diaz, and I'm coming to you from my home in Chandler, Arizona, where it is still my afternoon. I have been teaching for 27 years. I have 5 days left of year 27, not that anyone's counting. I currently am a reading interventionist at a junior high school that's a Title I school just outside of Phoenix. We began our year virtual, then we moved to in-person with minimal social distancing, but masks were mandated and all of the other mitigation strategies were in place. And then when we were in person, we found a lot of students were needing to be quarantined. So it became an in-person, live stream, asynchronous assignments on Google Classroom. Then we went back virtual, and then we came back in person to that same format. So we're finishing out the year in person, live streaming and asynchronous assignments for those students who may not have access to Wi-Fi.
Good evening, I'm Amy Eisenhart, and it's afternoon for Christine, but I am in the Northeast. I live near Albany, New York, right on the Mohawk River, and I am currently a 4th grade teacher, but I have taught every grade K through 6 except 2nd. And I was also a music educator before I became a classroom teacher. And I've worn a few different hats too. I've done some RTI coordination, and I've been a coach. And now I am also a responsive classroom consultant, which keeps me firmly in the role of a learner as well. So our current instructional setting, we went back right in September, and for our elementary students, we have a hybrid model. Parents could opt to be fully remote, and so we have a virtual academy for those students. And the students who remain, I have actually 2 classrooms, and I am in person in one classroom and I switch back every other day. So I am streaming to the opposite classroom, and then any students who need to quarantine are also then on my Promethean board and in a Meet. So it's been a very different year, but very creative also.
Good evening. I am coming from St. Paul, Minnesota. So it's about 6:05 here. My name is Candice Logan. I use the pronoun she and her. And I'm living in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I work in Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm currently residing on the Dakota land. I am, my role in Minneapolis is Executive Director of Equity and Integration and Social Emotional Learning, but they couldn't fit it all on one line. So I call it alphabet soup, but I get the opportunity and the privilege to support our equity efforts as well as our engagement in our social emotional learning work. In Minneapolis, we started the school year in distance learning, and we transitioned to in-person as an option for families and caregivers who chose it in February, starting with our elementary. And then we had a rolling of our middle school and then our secondary, our high school. And so we have the option, again, for families, if they want to have their children go to school in person or remain in distance learning. And I think that's it. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Morrell, coming to you this evening from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. I'm wrapping up my 15th year of teaching, and similar to all of us, this was probably the most challenging of all years. This past year have been teaching 4th grade. I've also had experiences teaching 6th grade, and I started my career in 4th grade as well. And this year, similar to many of the other panelists that we've heard from, we started the year 100% virtual. After the first month, we began using a hybrid model with 2 different cohorts. So they would alternate 2 days a week each. And while I see Bucks County popping up there. And while we were doing the hybrid, we were also doing the concurrent teaching as well. We did switch to in-person during the new year, and we still have the option for live streaming for parents and families that are opting for that. So kind of doing a bag of all tricks this year. So I'm excited to be here to reflect on the year and to share some ideas about how to end the year on a positive note.
Thank you, educators. And we also have an incredible group of student panelists. So I'm going to have the students introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Brooke. I am a 9th grader in Massachusetts. And right now I am learning fully in person, but that's not the way it was for the whole school year. In the beginning of the year, we did, I think, 2 weeks of fully virtual. And then we came in, everyone went once a week, and there was a quarter of the students in every day for 4 days. And then Friday, we were all virtual on Zoom again. And then for most of the school year, we were hybrid. So half the building was in 2 weeks and half in the other, or half in 2 days a week, and then half in the other 2 days a week. And everyone has been Zoom Fridays, and now we're all in person since the last week of April.
So Sean, make sure you unmute so we can hear.
My name is Sean. I'm a 7th grader learning in school in Maryland. For the first 2 months of my school year, we were doing school in a virtual environment. And after Christmas break in January, we came back to school full time.
I'm Owen. I'm a 6th grader learning in Pennsylvania. And for the first semester of the year, we were learning all virtual. And then in the second semester, we were doing hybrid with like half the kids in half the week and half the kids in the other half of the week. And everyone was virtual on Wednesday. And then since the 4th semester, everyone's been in person for 5 days a week.
Hello, I am Sierra. I am a 5th grader learning virtually from Virginia. I have been learning virtually this entire school year, and I have not been in the building to do school except for taking my SOL.
All right. So this incredible group of panelists are going to share some insights and be able to kind of give us an idea of what this year has been like and reflect on that and celebrate successes, but then also provide some insight as well. So we're just going to start by thinking about this year has been unique and it has been challenging, unlike any other. And so one of the first things we're wondering is, how would you describe this year? And we're going to begin with our students in sharing how you would describe this year. How would you describe this particular school year?
So I just transitioned to the high school this school year, so it definitely took some adjusting. Learning the layout of the building took a bit longer. I felt like I didn't fully know my full way around the building until we were in full hybrid mode, so 2 days a week. But after that, it was as smooth as you could expect. It was somewhat easier on the workload, I think, because of COVID and the unpredictable situation. My teachers were nicer on the amount of work. They let us ease into school, and they weren't super strict on deadlines, which was great. It really helped us adjust. But I also miss seeing my friends in school every day. Some of them were in the other cohort. But overall, it was a challenge, but I got used to it.
I would describe this school year as limited. We are limited to 15-person classes, which are called pods, and we stay in these 15-person classes all day. The only time we go out and go to another classroom are for electives. And I would have preferred to see my other friends' different classes, but this year was different. In 6th grade, pre-COVID, we had a dining hall where at lunchtime, like around 12, all of the students in the middle school and the high school would there would be like tables, and it was like a really big building, so I could see all of my friends there. But you can't do that this year. COVID.
I would describe this year as like unexpected because I never really knew like what was going to happen and how we were going to learn. Like after we went back hybrid, then we have to go back like virtual for a while, and then it was like back to hybrid, and there was just like a lot of adjusting to do. But I got pretty lucky because most of my friends ended up in the same cohort as me, and then I made some new friends, and it was kind of cool because it was my first year in middle school. So I think it was obviously a lot different than most people's like first middle school experience. But I think that the teachers did a good job like letting everyone kind of settle in, and it was a good year, I think, because I learned stuff and I could learn new I don't know what the word skills.
I would describe the school year very unique and different because we had to get used to learning virtually, which I personally am not. I don't normally learn online, and I haven't been homeschooled. So this year has been very different for me, getting used to being virtual, and it has just been sort of just different and fun getting used to learning virtually.
So we've heard from our students and what they would describe this year as. How would you describe this year as an educator?
Well, as educators, no matter what year, we always have our plates very full. And I would say that this year it was spinning very full plates. And so I think about the practice of responsive advisory meeting, and that was a plate that would spin really well on its own for the most part. But then there were some things like, how do you do this in a virtual setting? How do you do this in a setting where maybe kids are getting kicked in and out? How do you maintain that positive community? And so it was a challenging year, but a very rewarding year, because every time that plate would wobble in a practice that was a strength, we would be able to kind of troubleshoot together and keep it going, keep it spinning, and build on the community that we had virtually that then led into our in-person to be strong as well. And then thinking about the academics, it was, I think, an open eye experience. What is truly important for our students? What are the skills that they really need? As well as what are the social and emotional skills they need to be able to show those academic skills. So I think those would be the words that I would use to describe my year.
I know the metaphor of a roller coaster gets used an awful lot, but I'm going to grab it this one more time because it fits for me. And when I talk to my colleagues and my students, I feel like we have had these twists and turns and anticipation coming into the year, wondering, what would it be like and how will we do? And so I feel like not only did we get in line for a roller coaster without really asking for the ride, but also a lot of times I felt like it was a roller coaster in the dark where I didn't really know what was coming next. And there were some real sharp turns, but we laughed together, we screamed together on that roller coaster ride this year. And I know that when we all get off and catch our breath, our reflection will take us to a place where we feel very proud of ourselves. And we probably found out that we faced the things that were unknown or new or challenging in a way that we can feel really proud of. So I'm glad we're going to have a chance to share ideas about how we do that, because it's really important to take stock and reflect on all of our strengths and the way we held each other up this year.
I would describe this past year as, and I'm going to date myself when I say this, as Jumanji. You remember the movie Jumanji? Anyone who's ever watched it, they start out playing this game. They're like, oh, this is fun. And then all of a sudden they open the door and like a herd of elephants run down the hall, right? Like in the house. So all of these unexpected things happened to us. And all of the schooling that we had, all the paper, all the MD, not MD, what do you call it? The doctor, all the alphabet soup behind our name did not prepare us for playing Jumanji. So I would say the unexpected, like the humility that was necessary to say to students, yeah, we're figuring this out together. I promise you, I'm gonna teach you something. But we're gonna ride this roller coaster that Amy's talking about while we're playing Jumanji at the same time, and we're spinning plates. So as an educator, having to, like we talk in responsive classroom a lot about, it's not the teacher control or the student control, that is collaboration, that it's a shared power, that we really had to lean into that, particularly our educators who didn't have a lot of comfort in releasing that control. But when you have no power over whether or not a student has their camera on or off, you realize like all your little magic is gone. And was that really magic to begin with? So we spent a lot of time talking with our educators about like, take this moment to free yourself of all the rules that you thought you had to follow as an educator, that you had to have all the answers, that you couldn't look afraid, that you couldn't show any emotion, that you couldn't be vulnerable, because the students are feeling it, the families are feeling it, and the more you humanize yourself, the better for all of you. And then reminding ourselves, I would say for myself included, and our educators and our families, that like we're gonna get through this together. And so these benchmarks that are out there that maintain status quo, we have to free ourselves of that and just say, we need to make sure that we get out of this on the other side fully intact with children and adults who feel that like they brought their best and we worked and got through this together. So we're almost at the end of this the spinning plates and the Jumanji and the roller coaster. And I think when we come out on the other side, what we'll find out is all about the human connection, and it's all about holding space with one another. And just that we are experiencing right now something that's going to be in the history books. And so I remind students, like, here's this moment where you're actually living in, like, this is history. This is going to be recorded. Somewhere in the Smithsonian, there's going to be a face mask. And you're going to be able to say, I lived during that time, right? So like trying to bring, not lightening it not making light of the pandemic. So please don't hear that. But reminding students that really we are living in something that many of us have never experienced before. And so we're doing this together.
Yeah, I think I would describe this year kind of twofold. One, as an opportunity. Last spring, I just really missed the opportunity of being with my students, and whether that was in person when we got sent home or we didn't really have any virtual format. So I was so excited when I found out that, yes, we were going to have school, although it wasn't going to be traditional. We were going to be 100% virtual to start. I was just so excited to have that opportunity to build community with another group of students, and kind of like Candice was saying, knowing that it was going to be this completely unique experience. But with that, it kind of, once we got into school, it felt like we were constantly going through like a game of whack-a-mole, where each day different things would pop up. One day you've got that lesson planned for 8 kids in person, the 16 kids at home, and then those 8 kids didn't come, or 5 of the 8 came in. Or I remember the one day early on, the internet crashed in my classroom. And so it was just this idea of really modeling for students what perseverance looks like, what patience looks like, but also just being a human in the process, and that we're in this together. We're gonna get through this. As we had cohorts, then we became one full group together with students live streaming, and we still have kind of that revolving door, that whack-a-mole, where things keep popping up, and we just kind of roll with the punches and just stay positive and keep the focus on the academic and the social emotional learning.
Just listening to everyone share, that the thought that comes up constantly was there were many challenges throughout the year. There were things that were outside of our control and things that we were able to navigate. So thinking about this year and thinking about all of those challenges, what are some of the challenges that presented themselves this school year, and how did you overcome them? I want to start with our students first. What are some of those challenges that you experienced, and how did you overcome them?
A big challenge I faced, especially when we were hybrid, because on days I wasn't in school, it was asynchronous. And so a big challenge I faced was time management. I'll admit it, I procrastinate sometimes. And so it was really just getting up in the morning, getting started with my work. Once I got going, getting into a rhythm of staying with my class. I tried to stay with my schedule, like the kids in school were. And so it was just trying to develop my time management skills. And even with some assignments I had that were like assigned Monday and due Friday, it was just making sure I worked on them a bit each day, planning out time to work on it. And just one more challenge I had to overcome was just adjusting to the whole COVID, wearing masks in school and 6 feet apart. But I think my teachers and my friends around me, they all supported me and like led a good example. And so we all kind of overcame that together.
A challenge I faced in the beginning of the school year while I was online was like not getting distracted by all the things in my room, because at the time I was doing my classes in my room and I had like all of my stuff in there, and it was easy to get distracted. And a challenge that I had in person was like keeping my mask on all of the time. The only time you were allowed to have it off was during lunch periods, and we had to eat outside for that. And another challenge in person was keeping my mask on even during phys ed.
I think this is probably a challenge for pretty much everyone, but just like tech stuff with technology, like Wi-Fi was constantly kind of breaking. I'm probably on like my 4th loaner Chromebook, and like apps are always breaking. Like sometimes my teachers can't post assignments and stuff. Like my teacher has like an attendance post every day where we answer the question, and that's how she knows that we're like in, like that's like instead of calling roll. And sometimes it takes her like many tries that like actually get it onto like we use Schoology, and it's the app we use, and it usually takes her like lots of tries to get it on there, just because technology always acts weird. and it's kind of different for everyone. Like some days it'll work fine, and some days it'll be completely crazy. And yeah, just like lots of stuff with technology.
In the beginning of virtual learning, I had a hard time paying attention, and that also made me getting work done pretty challenging. But to help me, I got some fidgets and some stress toys, and that actually helped me pay more attention during class, and they also helped me clear my mind while I was working. And well, it's been a while now, and I actually don't really use the stress toys anymore and the fidgets, because I have grown on that skill.
So let's hear from our educators. There are probably many challenges we can discuss, but what's something that you feel like, yeah, this one particular challenge and the overcoming of it was something that not only benefited you in your teaching, but also your students?
So as a reading interventionist, starting the year off virtually, books. How do I get books into my students' hands when we're in the middle of a pandemic? And so this was actually a blessing in disguise, because now I was able to expose my students to audiobooks, to subtitles on anime, to reading something that's on the screen as opposed to having a book on paper. And so many of my students realized that it wasn't that they didn't like reading, they just didn't like reading a paper book. And it was a really great opportunity for me as an educator to really hone in, like knowing our students is truly an important thing, and knowing how they learn best can really help them succeed. And so with that in place, my goal as an educator, as an interventionist, is to move my students to proficiency. And as you can imagine, with the way our format was in and out, proficiency was not like it has been in years past. However, growth has been phenomenal. And this year, I had an opportunity to have 5 of my reading intervention students in my homeroom where we did responsive advisory meeting. 3 of them came in reading at the 4th or 3rd grade level. And they just took their proficiency placement test, and they are now on grade level. And I attest there, my testimony is to the power of making sure that our students have their needs for belonging, significance, and fun being met in that responsive advisory meeting does truly lead to academic gains. I had another student who came in reading at the 1st grade level, and she grew to the 4th grade level. And so using that envisioning language with them too is a way that I feel that I've helped them overcome their limiting beliefs and hopefully inspired them moving forward. Like, we overcame a lot with our reading this year, and if we can do this with our reading, we can really do anything.
So this year, in facing so many unknowns and having to find new ways to do things that we've done one way possibly for a very long time, I faced the challenge not only as a teacher, but as a colleague and also as a mom. So I'm looking at these amazing students who are sharing their experience so clearly and thoughtfully. And I think of my own son, who was a very independent student and now was facing some of the challenges you all have talked about. So I really found myself hanging on tightly to my language and thinking really carefully about how, when someone was struggling, whether it was my own son or a student, how important my own presence was, and that I was bringing complete acceptance for the situation. You know, maybe you didn't have the materials you need. Maybe you're struggling with time management, but just pulling back a little bit and making sure that I used, some language that would help affirm the things that were going well. Because it's a time where it was very easy to start getting a list of things, that assignments that weren't getting finished, or people that weren't checking in, or people who didn't have their camera on. So flipping that and using positive reinforcing language helped me as a mom and a teacher to be able to say, I noticed that you had your camera on for 2 full periods today. And I'm wondering, how did you make that happen? And when we're on tomorrow, would you be willing to tell others, like, what kind of tricks, like Sean was talking about, having everything suddenly around you in your room that are all your favorite things? That's not a bad thing, but maybe you can, if you're comfortable, share with the class. How are you managing? What's a strategy you're using to be able to focus with all those wonderful things nearby? So I would just say being really cognizant of my own energy and presence, and then the language that I was choosing to pull out those positive things and the gains we were making.
So I'm going to answer this question from where I currently sit in my position, and speak briefly about where we have been, where we are as a city and as a school district that is located in Minneapolis. So as we close out this year, we're spending a lot of time now in conversation about reflecting, right? So as we start to, we're within the last 6 weeks. We actually, I believe, have 3 weeks of school left. And so this is a lot of that time where we're not closing down, but like really looking over our shoulder, looking through the rearview mirror, looking in the rearview mirror at where we've come and the growth that has occurred, and also the challenges. So for myself and my team, a lot of our, like I would say our biggest challenge this year has been providing the just right supports to teachers and other staff to have very hard conversations about what's happening in our city, online, in children's homes, within earshot of the people who care about them most in the world. And what we found is that we have some educators that feel very comfortable talking about what's happening in our city, the racial unrest. Starting with last year, May 25th, it was our whole city and the world was rocked when George Floyd was murdered. And we had students that were there. And so when I think of where we've been May 26th up to where we are now, we have come a long way. We still have a long way to go. And I feel most proud about some of the resources that were provided and the really hard conversations that we had with educators about what you cannot do is be silent. So if you spend a significant amount of time at the start of the school year building relationships virtually, that's not easy at all, right? Especially if you are a 7th grade teacher and half of your class has their cameras off. So then you're like, I can't read your face. I'm not quite sure if you're engaged. I'm not sure if you understand. And the students on the other side are like, we're here, just teach already. Like, stop sweating me about turning my camera on. Just know I'm going to use the chat. I'll ask you questions. So it was just like, again, this feeling of losing the sense of control and connection that we had. But we talked about, if you have spent a significant amount of time cultivating strong relationships, talking about what it means to be part of a virtual community, then you need to leverage that to have the very challenging conversations, which is a reality of many of our students in Minneapolis lives. So to do all of that as a teacher, then my thing is, like, you invest a lot of money in the relationship, be willing to make a withdrawal, be willing to make a mistake, and trust that the community will hold you because you've done that co-creation together. And so leaning on responsive classroom practices, I've been a responsive classroom practicing teacher since, really gonna date myself, since I think maybe 2000, 2001, right? Somewhere around there. And I believe it in my bones. And I say to people who are kind of on the fence, are like, well, I'm not sure. I'm like, well, I would ask you, what do you do to build a relationship with someone that you want to get to know? Now multiply that by 27 or 30 and think about that investment in that relationship is also telling students, this place is in this virtual classroom, we could talk about anything. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'm willing for us to go through this together. And so I would say that that is a big piece of learning that we're going to continue doing now that we're in person. We're saying, teachers, you can't not say anything. You got to lean in, because students are going to remember who was silent and who leaned in and took a risk and had that conversation with them.
Candice, as you were speaking about relationships, you got me thinking about the relationships with my colleagues too. That was a part that I was really nervous about going into the school year. How am I going to plan virtually and collaborate when we're not even sitting at the same table and we're trying to do all these different things? And the challenge for me going into the school year was I had never used a learning management system before. I had never used Google Classroom or Canvas, Seesaw. And so I really relied on and leaned heavily on my teammates, especially early on in the school year. But that was in a virtual format too. So it was just a really tricky thing for us to kind of navigate. But luckily, I was on a very supportive team. You know, I'm fourth grade, so we're self-contained. We teach all subject areas. And my thought going in was, how am I going to do this? How am I going to plan all the things that we need during a school day when it literally takes 3 times the amount of time to plan for that little 30-minute activity that we're going to have fourth graders do? And so one of the challenges that with that idea of planning that my team used was we kind of divided and conquered. One teacher, she took on the math. I took on social studies. Another teacher took on science and language arts and so on. And it just really reminded me that in a given school year, teaching is difficult in a normal school year. But when we're requiring to post assignments and prepare slideshows and convert all of our material into virtual formats, we really need to come in with the idea that we can't do this alone. And I know, you know, a lot of teachers, we maybe had those opportunities where maybe we're not on the most supportive or collaborative teams. Reach out to colleagues, find things on Pinterest or Facebook and find that support, because we have to make sure in all of this, I've learned the importance of self-care, but also the importance of working closely with our colleagues, that we can do great things, especially when we support and lean on one another. So that was something that really is a challenge for me. I was blessed to be on a supportive team. I know teachers that maybe haven't, but have reached out and found that support. And just that reminder that teaching is difficult in all circumstances, but let's lean on those colleagues and support one another to do best for our kids.
Absolutely. And just thinking about just all of the challenges that people have shared, that students have shared, that the educators have shared, but even in the chat, people talking about this was really challenging in this particular subject area to do that this year. So we've been reflecting on the challenges. And so now I want to ask the educators a few questions about, with all of these challenges and thinking about this year and how to close it in the most meaningful way that allows for students to still feel heard, to still have those relationships still nurtured, and then making sure that we're creating an environment that continues to promote equity. What are some things that you're going to do this year, either something differently or something that you're going to tweak a little bit, so that the way that this year closes is a way that's positive for your students, that allows them to still feel significant, that allows them to still be seen and heard?
Well, as the year comes to an end, sometimes we forget that we've created like such a strong family unit. And sometimes our students will start to act in ways that are unfamiliar to us. They might act out, they might do things, they might shut down. And knowing our students, it's important that we see and hear those verbal and silent expressions of, I'm anxious, I'm nervous that this school year is ending and I don't know what the summer's going to bring or next year is going to bring. This year more than ever, I've been really mindful of paying attention to any changes that are going on in my students and checking in on them, because I want to make sure that they recognize the growth that they've made academically as well as people. I've seen so much more empathy towards each other, towards me, in learning all of the different technology pieces. And just being very purposeful in that, I think is something that is going to ease us into our summer. One of the things that I really worked on a lot this year was reinforcing language. And I discovered this extension on Google Chrome called Mote, and you can record yourself and then it plays back for the students. And it also will turn it into a text. And so one of the activities that we did last week is we went back and we listened to all of our growth. So thinking back where we were at the beginning of the year in the things that we did as good readers, and then what we can do now. Another thing that I like to do with my students is ask them to give advice. So reflecting on what went well for them, or maybe like, I should have done something a little bit different. And because we are in the middle of a pandemic, we can't really use paper and pencil and share all of that in the setting that I'm in. So we've been using Padlet, and they've been able to add their ideas and kind of give some support with those things. So I think it's important that we look back and look forward, and we pay attention to all of the things that our students are telling us out loud and also quietly.
So as a responsive classroom teacher myself, one of the things that took me a little while to put into my practice was closing circles. I was really excited about morning meeting, but I have to say, now that I use closing circles with my class, I'm thinking of the end of this year as one giant closing circle, because I know that it gives students a chance to celebrate small things and big things. And because we have practiced, we've gotten strong, I would say. We've learned from each other how to reflect on the day and pick out the little victories and show gratitude to our friends or teachers who have given us a boost that we needed during the day, and to celebrate things that we could do today, or things we're hoping we can do tomorrow. And so practicing that daily reflection and really wrapping the day with that sense of belonging. Our students had very natural paths to feeling significant and that sense of belonging. And we all had to reinvent that this year for ourselves, like Andy was talking about with our colleagues, and also with the families that are part of our classroom communities. And so, we no longer was like, oh, that's the student who made the goal at soccer yesterday, or that's the student who helped on the morning announcements today. Those natural things are, oh my gosh, I loved watching you play in the band concert last night. Those things that made us feel significant weren't readily available. So the practices in the classroom online were really even that much more important. And so as we wrap up and start to look back and reflect on our year, I really am going to think of it as a great big closing circle. And I'm brainstorming with my colleagues right now about how to include families in that, because more than ever, we have always said that knowing our families is very important. And boy, did we need each other more than ever. We needed to know each other, and we leaned on each other. And if we were going to help a student like those that Christine was speaking of, like all of our students, we had to communicate a lot more with families so that we were sure that everyone was okay and taken care of and getting what they need. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet, but I'm excited to figure it out.
I have a lot of thoughts in my head when I think about closing the year. One is gratitude, and building a little bit off of what you were sharing, Amy, about including the family. Providing students an opportunity to genuinely, and in a way that they can then have this tangible item to share gratitude to their families. If we, depending on wherever you were in the country, there was a significant expectation on the families to all of a sudden become educators. For some of us that were thrown right into remote learning, there wasn't a, hey, before we go into remote learning, we're going to have 2 weeks to practice what it looks like to ask for help, or to email your teacher because you don't understand the assignment. Or parent, here are the numbers that you can call when you feel like you're going to pull out this patch of blonde in the front of your hair because you don't remember how to do the kind of math that your child is bringing home, right? And you're trying to take care of the family and make sure you get toilet tissue because it's like $7 a roll. And you're like all of that. I'm just like, again, Jumanji, I'm flashing back to last spring. And all of that to then say to families, and you did it. So for students to be able to have an opportunity to say to their caregivers, thank you, and asking them to think about how did your family help you learn? One of the students on the panel was talking about growing in their skills. So asking students to think, how did your family, your siblings, your grandparents, your community help you grow? What did your village do for you to pour into you during this year? How can you express that sense of gratitude? How did your classmate support you in the classroom as you were transitioning, especially on that one day you were having a really hard time, Sean, because you were tired of wearing the mask and it was like really wet after you came in from recess and you were like, I just need another mask. And then your friend Joe gave you a dry mask, right? Like, how do we provide those opportunities? I'm sorry, Sean, I'm not picking on you, but I was trying to show you I was listening. But to have those opportunities to be able to say thank you because we did go through this together and some of us had a harder time than others. I think if we're capitalizing on this community that we built, how do we then say, and we did this together, right? So gratitude is one, and then providing options for be able to do that. So my mind goes back to academic choice and having anyone who's familiar with the book, 3 Words from Sophia. If you don't have it, it's great. You can introduce words like verbose to your students. But it's the student who's trying to buy, she wants a giraffe and she has to convince her family that she should have a giraffe as a pet, but she has to figure out how to have this compelling ask to each of her family members who have very different ways that they process. So to me, that's a way of introducing academic choice. She has these different ways of doing it, but she has the same goal at the end. So I would ask students, in what way can you express your biggest learning from the year? Or what's your biggest takeaway from this school year? What are you taking into next year with you? How might you do that? We've practiced, we've worked on poetry. We just finished poetry month. Maybe it's a skit. So trying to make it fun because at that same time, they are mourning. They are mourning, saying goodbye to one another. And what I remember about before I left the classroom, one of the practices in the spring, and Christine, I think you were talking about that, was when we got to those last few, those 6 weeks of school, I said to my class explicitly, hey, look, we're getting ready to close out the year. We have 6 weeks of school left and we will be learning up until the day that you leave. But I want to name something that's probably going to happen for some of you, if not all of you. And that is you're going to be preparing yourself to say goodbye and you won't even know it. And one day you're going to come to school and you're going to be really mad. And you might be so mad that you say something to me that you've never said before because it's going to hit you that you're not going to see me for 3 months. And if you're a 6th grader, you're not going to see me unless you come back and visit when you're in middle school. So I want to name for you that what you're going through right now, and when you do come to school and you show up like a gremlin, I'm going to still greet you and say, yeah, you know what? I see behind that. What your behavior is telling me is that you're not ready to say goodbye, and that's okay. So I think making the invisible visible to students so that they don't start to label themselves or each other as being naughty, but really mourning takes on different modes. You have the student that goes in, and then you have the student that's like, it's easier for me to say goodbye to you if I'm mad at you, Miss Logan. I don't like you. So I can say bye on the last day of school because I'm mad, because then I don't have to then sit with the feeling of loss. And that was helpful. And it was helpful for me as a teacher to remember that too. And to also encourage my colleagues when they were feeling very frustrated because they weren't able to try to repair what they felt was happening for their student, is saying it's a part of the mourning process. So how do you name it? And then walk through it with them, because we all have to figure out how we're going to say goodbye for now.
It's so neat to hear about the idea of thanking the families and the caregivers. I've been thinking for the last 6 weeks, really trying to build in more reflection for my students, and that was a piece that I've been missing so far. So I'm excited to add that in with my students, as we have 3.5 weeks left at this point. as I mentioned, I've been trying to build in a lot more reflection though for my students to really think about just not only what they learned, but how they did it. And just the amount of pride that they should have in themselves for really doing something that this time 12 months ago, I think many of us would have thought was almost impossible. I never would have envisioned that this was how I would be teaching this school year. And I want to make sure that my students realize that as well, that students are celebrating their successes. So we've been building in a lot of, guided reflection, whether it be during sharing at morning meeting or maybe at the end of a lesson or during a closing circle. Two in particular that I wanted to share tonight that are working really well in my fourth grade classroom. One that we're calling, it's called Dice Discussion. We're taking a number cube, and on the Google Classroom, we're posting, if you get a 1, you're going to reflect on maybe what was your favorite book this school year. If you get a 2, what was a challenge that you faced this school year and how did you overcome it? Or a 3, what are you going to reflect on and remember the most about fourth grade? And so the kids have really been engaged in those conversations and really reflecting in a really powerful way. Again, not just about the content that was learned, but really the process with how they did it. And then a second one that we've been using, each day we've been adding to this, we're calling it the ABCs of 2020, 2021. And so we started with A is for, and the students named a memory from our class that they want to remember this year. And then we're gradually building so that the last day of school, we can read through that. I guess it's not an acrostic poem, but an ABC poem that we're creating together to really reflect and to, again, celebrate just the pride that all of us should have in overcoming something that really, to me, felt impossible this time last year. So building in that reflection is so important. And it's something that we as educators need to do, and we need to make sure we're taking time for our students to do that and to celebrate their successes this year.
Thanks for sharing that. And so we've talked about reflecting and we've thought through some ways to close the year. And so as we wrap up this evening, I have one final question for all of our panelists, and we're going to start with our educators, but we're going to end with our students and just briefly sharing with this whole year and thinking about what it's been like and just thinking about successes and celebrations. What's one thing that you would say to keep in mind as the year comes to a close so that you can end the year in a way that's positive and joyful for everyone? So we'll start with our educators. They'll briefly share, and then our students will share.
I would say probably the success in really meeting my students' learning needs through all of the technology I was so afraid of before. I would pretend that, oh, I don't know where the power button is. And now I'm excited about the different formats that we have used and how it's actually changed instruction. With our students being in and out so much, it's hard to interactive model when you have students that are coming and going in person or virtually. And so I'm like the extension lady, an extension like Loom, where I can record and show and go through that whole interactive model. And then students who aren't able to be there can watch it and still feel like they're part of that community because they're able to add their comments to the comment area of the things that they saw. So I would say that for me, and a success that I really experienced this year was adding technology and diversifying my knowledge of students to the responsive classroom practices that I know have been so helpful for me in the past.
So while all of us on the screen and all of our colleagues and families everywhere couldn't decide what this year was going to be like, we had to give over control of a lot of things and become very flexible. We can decide what we focus on. So what I'm going to keep in mind is that a lot of the growth that we have been through is not going to be assigned a letter or a number on a report card. And the things that we're going to celebrate and the ways that we grow, I think making those very visible by helping parents to understand the social emotional learning that we've seen and the growth and naming it and being able to say, you know, your child learned to advocate for themselves. I think Candice was saying, you know, you learned how to email your teacher. Your parent didn't do that for you this year. You did that. And being able to have the kind of self-control it took for many of us, teachers included, to be in our homes and still focus and do good work and help one another. So that's what I'm going to take away, is making sure that I let everyone around me and my students and empower my families to focus on all of the areas that we grew and not be as concerned maybe about some of those more traditional ways that we measure how a school year went.
My biggest learning over the course of the last year has been that we can go through the portal and leave old practices behind. That we can, and I wish I could remember the name of the amazing person. Their last name is Roy. It might be Arundatu. Okay. Last name is Royarund, and I'll see if I can find it before the end of the webinar. But she has a beautiful quote where she's talking about going through the portal. So I would just say briefly that we found that we could educate and not have to be in the same physical space as students. And children found themselves with teachers who discovered TikTok. You can learn how to cook on TikTok. I'm just saying. I learned how to put the trash can in the container in a whole different way on TikTok. So TikTok, you can get a good education on there. TikTok and TED Talk, I want to get like a master's or PhD in both of those. But I bring that up to say that when we do go back, whatever fall looks like, if it isn't in person, thank you, Jane Dunlap. Yes, the name is in the chat. You can use those same things even when we're in face-to-face, right? Because we know if we're really leaning into what is engaging to our students, TED Talks can be that expert input, and then have students have an opportunity to talk with one another. The TikTok video, you know, finding something that's gonna pique their interest or surprise them with the newest J. Cole video, and they'll look at you like, what? You're not as square as I thought. Right? Or like any of the people that the students are interested in. And then that doesn't have to go away because we're not in virtual learning anymore. So I guess that's my biggest thing is we don't have to go back to status quo. We don't have to go back to whatever normal was. Because if we're honest with ourselves, I know in Minneapolis, normal was not working for the majority of our children. So let's not go to normal. Let's go to, not back. Let's go to where our students are saying they need that engagement, and then let's meet them there.
I just keep thinking about the importance of acknowledging what our students and what all of us have gone through over this past year, and really celebrating and making sure that we're letting students hear it from our spoken words, our written words, just how proud we are of their perseverance, their grit, the flexibility that they've demonstrated, and that hopefully we've modeled even on those bad days when the internet crashes or whatever. That, you know, life's going to throw you curveballs, but what you learned this year outside of the content, those skills are going to carry over with you into the future. And so just acknowledging that and letting students know that I see it, I recognize it, and it's going to go with you in the future. You're set up for great success. And I'm so proud of everything that you've done this year.
So we're going to wrap up with our students and just sharing what's the most important thing that you would like to keep in mind, or that you want people to keep in mind as we close this year.
I would say a very important thing is, and I know a lot of the educators on the Zoom talked about it, but the community that we've built. I think going through this whole COVID pandemic uncertainty really brought me closer to my classmates and to my teachers. And so I would like to continue that sense of community with me next year and the years going forward, and just really trying to make sure we continue to check each other and stay together and support each other.
The most important thing to keep in mind as the school year comes to a close are the relationships that I've made in my pod of 15 people during the year, because those will last well into the upcoming grades of my school year.
Something that's been important for me to keep in mind this year has been like, even though there's been a lot of like hardships, there's also been a lot of benefits of the pandemic. Like I would have had to wake up like half an hour earlier, but now the bus comes later, so I can get like extra sleep that I need. Like the teachers sometimes, like my one teacher, her kids sometimes they need her like, they need my teacher to like pick them up, and now they can like post class work on like the websites. So, and we can have like asynchronous days, and we don't need to have like a sub that needs to like figure stuff out. They just kind of need to be in there to make sure we don't start like doing spitballs and stuff like that. But yeah, just to remember that there have been like benefits and not just hardships.
I think that one thing that everybody should take to the next school year is to keep on persevering, because this school year had a lot of difficulties and a lot of challenges. And I think most people just had to persevere through them and come up with different things to do. And I know it could be very hard for teachers to try and keep students engaged and to like know what students are feeling. And for students, it might be hard to let the teachers know what they are feeling. But we just have to keep on persevering and thinking of new things that we can do to take on to the next school year. It may not be virtual, it may be virtual, but no matter what, we should persevere and just keep on trying, and we can get through this.
Thank you, and well said. And I want to just thank everyone for joining us this evening. And I definitely want to thank our incredible panel for sharing their insights, for reflecting with us, and just being able to share all that with everyone who joined us this evening. So thank you for joining us this evening, and have a wonderful night.